Phyllis and I showed up here in 1987, so the church was several years old by that point. So, we were a little bit of latecomers compared to a lot of you folks. I remember moving in to our house just on this road, a few houses down, and this guy showed up to help us unload the U-Haul. So that was actually, I don't know if we had been to the church yet at that point. Hadn't. So somehow somebody spoke with someone, and Bob heard that we were coming and that we'd been members of the Christian church all our lives, and so he just showed up. And I don't recall Molly showing up to help. I do recall Bob
She was
showing
in the
up.
kitchen.
She was in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's church stories, not neighborhoods.
Yes. So that is my first recollection or my most vivid recollection of just coming to Jefferson City and becoming a part of it was the Emmer family and Bob in particular coming to come and help us move in. Phyllis might have some better memories of like our first Sunday or something like that. I remember, musicals that our kids were in, as young children, and those sorts of things, those kind of memories.
And this group of people stayed around after church. We were there long after church, just visiting, enjoying each other, just like the chatter tonight. We just enjoyed being together, enjoyed each other.
Our kids would bring their roller skates or their bicycle somehow into the church building, right around in the parking lot. We remember doing that a good bit.
That's one of the things I remember. I don't know if Melissa knew how to roller skate, but she brought her roller skates down, and Rebecca taught Melissa roller skating.
John taught.
And Luke taught our kids how to ride a bike.
And Melissa, how long did you teach class at our church?
That's Phyllis.
Phyllis, excuse me.
I taught the 3rd through 5th or 6th graders
But how long did you?
until those 3rd graders were in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And I told them I had to let them go because I had taught them all I knew, and Georgie told me to learn something.
Something else.
Well, my point in asking that question is I think you had every child we had in Sunday school, and probably every person here can say the same thing.
I know they can.
Yes.
You had all four of our children.
We did that young Sunday school class, and the 4 of us took them camping. That was an experience. And then later Greg taught at college age, and we had several people that are in this room in that class.
And I will add, Miss Phyllis never missed a birthday, a play at school. Like, she was 100% in on Natasha. That was one of Natasha's biggest mentors. I think you had Courtney for a little while, but I think that's shifted around a little bit. But she always got birthday cards from her and postcards, and just
That's neat.
wonderful.
Anyone else have stories like that? It seems like the fellowship that began with each family as they came in. What are some of the other things that you can recall that were integral to going Jefferson City Christian Church as a special place? Anybody else?
We came when it was just Judy and I and our family. We were just. They were still meeting in the laundromat of the housing project, and so it was just a real small congregation. But I'll carry it a little further. I remember meeting in the new facility, and I declare, that was the poorest church I think I'd ever seen established. I mean, we had absolute. I just started my insurance agency, and we were just. I think the first year I made like $28,000, and I had to pay my office expenses out of that. Well, you can imagine, even in those days, there wasn't hardly anything left. We were just, and Bob and Molly, they came on a limited, and everybody in the church.
Gee, we were making $20,000.
I know you were. I think it was probably the highest paid person in the church. Really, yeah. But,
How we.
and the people that were there were just country folks and.
Everybody just sort of come together.
But let me tell you this, and I remember when the Harrells came, you said this, Sue, you said to me one time, she said, you know what? I think y'all love each other. and that was the truth. Nobody had any money, but when we came together, we were just a big family. We'd have Sunday night services and we'd sing for an hour. And it was great.
But tell them how we got to come to Jefferson City. Okay, one Saturday.
I'll let you tell that story.
One Saturday, this nice looking man came to our house, really neat and tidy with,
Was it Saturday?
it was on a Saturday.
Okay, you remember better now.
And he came with one of the Odom boys, which we knew. And he said, well, we're visiting, we're starting a new church in Jefferson City and we're visiting people. And I said, well, come on in, my husband's under the house and they're putting up insulation. And so after that, he came to me and he said, listen, I didn't know y'all went to church someplace else. I thought y'all didn't go to church anymore. And it was Bob. He came to visit. And
Well, that was the kind of country folk we had. They would come to your house and try to get you to come to their church without thinking the situation through, perhaps. But I want to stress it was just a joy to come to church because everybody was of one accord. We loved each other, and we had a good time in fellowshipping. In praise and worship and in just being with one another. We were all family.
And we would go to,
I'm sorry.
often we would get there and everybody was there that we knew was coming. And so we would say, let's go to the park. And so we would all go to the park and we would have our singing and preaching at the park. And sometimes we would think about it early enough till we would decide to have breakfast. And Bill would cook breakfast, his brother Bill, and we would have breakfast at the park, and we would stay and have our fellowship and communion and everything, and then we'd spend most of the day at the
I
park,
think that
all
was-
of us
I
together.
thought that was Easter.
Well, thank you.
Easter.
Susan,
Yeah,
remember
we did.
the first 2 years, we had
Yeah.
sunrise
Do you not
service
remember
at the
what
lake.
happened
At the
then?
lake, yes.
At the
Sure is.
lake.
We had no place to fellowship because we were meeting up there, and we would call even on the Saturdays, like Little House on the Prairie. The women would all pack up a picnic basket, the kids would get their toys, and the men would build the church. Jim, Kenneth, Joe, I'm not sure who all was involved. I know
Yule
Bob,
was there.
Yule,
Mhm.
and we would pack up a lunch and let the kids bring their toys and stuff, and we had nowhere, and so we'd go to the park. We brought boats one time. Remember, we'd bring boats out to the park.
Do
and
y'all
we'd all
not
go.
remember what happened to Jim?
I wasn't gonna tell that story, Jim. I was not.
I could not.
He did not rip his pants and have to get a towel. He didn't do that. It was something else.
Oh, but I remember the towel of Jim.
Please tell us.
I have pictures.
Yeah.
I have pictures.
You know, we got to.
That'll be for the director's cut.
Now what they're saying
What
is I was swimming in shorts while I was doing it to it, buddy.
You were on the
You were on.
You were skiing.
No, I was skiing.
Yes.
I fell, and I fell hard.
Yeah.
Well, it bursted the seat out of my pants. Well, you know, I'm in the water. And I got no seat in my pants. I didn't want to come out.
That's when Yule nicknamed you Ski Daddy.
That's exactly right.
We did. He called him
Were
Ski
y'all
Daddy
daddy?
forever.
It was priceless.
And what was, I thought was sad is when we decided the church had grown enough that we had to stay at the building on Easter Sunday.
After a couple of years, we said, somebody might want to visit us on Sunday morning. We had to meet at the building.
Yes, that's right.
So Joe and Sarah, talk a little bit about your experience and
Ours was similar to Jim and Judy's. We had moved to Hicks Road, just right above KFC there. It was our first house. And we had just lost our first child. And Lisa and Molly came and visited, I believe. And invited us to the church.
Your timeline's just a little off, but yeah, that they did come and visit us, but that was before we had Whitney. That was before that, because yeah, Lisa and they say First Christian Church people are a tightly entwined group, and it doesn't matter where you live in the country, they're going to find out if you've got family going somewhere. For instance, Greg and Phyllis's dad went to church in, was it Georgia, with some of my family, my mother's family? And then my mother went to church in Rogersville, and that's how she met Lisa. So Lisa found out, my mother, I'm sure, told Lisa that we were coming here, and so we ended up, her and Molly came and visited us, and I can't remember if somebody brought food, like a loaf of bread or
I'm
something.
sure it was us.
And so after that, we just started coming. But with that said,
I think the building was just about done though, wasn't it?
I think we came to the building.
Yeah.
The building was already done. But it's just I don't know what we would do without this group.
There was a lot of love.
Yeah, there is. But the interesting thing, I think, for me, that has kept me probably walking the right path or whatever, is just the love of the church. I mean, when my grandmother died, Joe Widener's parents had gone to church with my grandmother in Kingsport at the First Christian Church, and all the elders, now this was like 88, no, this is 91. All the elders at our church came to Kingsport to my grandmother's funeral. So, which is just wonderful. And then, of course, Joe and I did have a baby that died, and so I cannot tell you the love from this church. And then Casey came along a year and a half later. So, I don't know how anybody survives without a church family. I mean, just if nothing else, the love, not only the love of God, but the love of God through all the members of the church. And then it doesn't hurt to have people fight over your child when you bring them in for the nursery, Judy and Sue and Lisa and Connie would stand at the door was cut in half down the hall there, and they would all be trying to get her. So, and she was raised in the church as well, so you just can't not love everybody that's here,
So they talk a little bit about family. We broached it a couple of times. Sarah, you've been very eloquent about it. But let's talk a little bit about family. And Lisa, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit, because your family has been a part of this church from the beginning. When you talk about family and this church, what are the things that come to mind for you?
Well, I will say the love had to be, I never felt like that I didn't have the support and love in my family. Also, the support and love of course, the Emmerts, him being the pastor and everything, but from everyone. And I think it was like in the Bible, how it speaks of having mentors. Well, we were all close to the same age, but I think every one of these women had so much of an input into how I decided to raise my children and how the things. Molly and I would clip coupons out of the Sunday paper, and we would go to 5 different grocery stores on Monday to buy groceries, because like Jim said, we were all poor, real poor. But we had so much fun, and we were teaching one another how to be mamas, how to be wives, how to be, servants, I guess, too. But both my girls were baptized and, came to know Christ. And it is, like you said, it is not like a church you just attend. It is a family. It is truly a family. I think probably in this room I've had some. I know Luke worked with me. I had a daycare, and so Luke worked with me. A bunch of people that goes to church. Molly worked with me. I think Judy, all the people that are shaking their heads, I was able to use them as a family. Like we all just counted on each other for everything. And Yule and the Bob and Yule and Jim and Kenneth would get together, and even when it wasn't church time, we'd play tennis. And remember when the old
Till we
men
got old,
beat up
started
on the
breaking ankles.
I remember Jim and Bob were on one team, and Yule and Kenneth, and that Dad would play, exactly. And I'm pretty sure Kenneth and Yule both had an injury, and Bob and Dad were older. They just like throwing rocks at payday. Yo, come on, So it was beautiful because it wasn't just at church. Truly, our lives were 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That was my family, and I say that for myself. I won't speak for, the rest of my family, but I think my whole family feels that way. It was truly a family.
What about Holtzclaws? What about you all?
Well, we had moved down here from Virginia, and we wouldn't attend any church. We wouldn't go anywhere. And of course, I didn't know Jim and Judy as well as my Judy knew them. And I think the way they met was a dog got lost, and the two Judys met each other, and it was our pet that we was hunting for. And so anyway, I guess a few months maybe after that, Jim and Bob had knocked on our door and wanted to talk to us about coming to church. And you always think of a church as being a church building, but this was a laundromat. And I'm thinking of a laundromat. So anyway, I guess they want to clean us up. That's what they want to do. But anyway, so Judy and I decided that we would make a decision and start going there. And we went down and visited, and just like everyone has said here, we were welcomed, and everybody become a close-knit family. And from this point forward, even today, I mean, we still all stay in contact with each other 40 years later. But that's how we got started at the church. And we've enjoyed every minute of it.
You were the treasurer. You took.
That's right. I was the treasurer. I was the treasurer of the church.
He's the only one
several
who could do
years.
math. He's the only one that could do math.
I'm like, but it was a small church, and I liked that, and I liked the people that I was around, and I think that's very important. It's just everybody that you're around that you feel comfortable with, and throughout life, you have to be supported by the different people that you're around, and through the journey of life, we all have tragedies, and through this whole journey, during the tragedies we've had in our lifetime, everyone's been here to support us and been with us, and that's important. So.
I think it's interesting you talk about church. People think it's a building, but they're inviting you to a laundromat. But that's kind of an object lesson in itself. It doesn't really matter where you're meeting because church isn't about the building; it's about the people and about the families. And when I think of families of the church, I think of Sue's family. And main reason I do is because Keith Oakes was such a huge, he loved Bruce on like a very, when I first came to the church, it was odd to me how much my contemporary loved this man. And it was just really amazing to me to watch why it was grow over time. Because, while I wasn't nearly as close to your husband as some of those other guys were, it was really amazing for me to see that mentorship and what it meant for now Keith and us as the contemporaries and our responsibility for what's next. But I mean, can you expand on Bruce a little bit, or maybe your family or your involvement? Oh, Bob's got a hand up.
Now,
So
let me tell you how they got to be at our church, if I may.
You can't.
So you tell that story about
So
your
you
children.
tell
I
it.
don't know if you're going to tell it, but I want you to be sure to tell that about your children.
Okay. Well, we went to a Christian church in Morristown. And of course, we heard the news that a new church was starting here. And so we decided we would, come down to see it. And so we did, and we loved it. It's like you say, you fall in love with the people immediately. and it was in the laundromat, and the washers and dryers were in there, and we would set up a few chairs. And so we would come, in fact, I think Judy and Jim did this in the beginning with us. We would alternate Sundays from Parker Road and come down just so that Bob wouldn't have to teach just and preach just to his family. You know, Grace Ann would say often, "Gosh, I'm so glad you came, so Dad'll look at you instead of me." But anyway, we would come and we came and we came and then even we were still coming during the time when the church was being built. And our boys were teenagers. The church in Morristown had been their home church their whole life. And they were getting ready, the oldest one, to go off to school. And we thought, we can't just up and leave up there. That's their home church. This is at such an age that they might just quit going to church because teenagers have a tendency to do that. So we were very cautious about saying anything about, let's put our membership with this group and let's go every Sunday here instead of every other Sunday or so. But we didn't quite know what to say to the boys. So one day we're driving to church, and I can't remember if it's Mark or Greg, but they said, one of them said, "Mom, Dad, we need to talk to you today." And I said, "Well, okay, what do you need to talk to us about?" And they said, "Well, we don't want to hurt you. We don't want to get you upset or anything, but we've decided that we're going to Jefferson City, to the church there, and that's going to be our church, and we are going to place membership with that group of people because we love everybody so much." And we were like, hallelujah. We've been waiting for this. So we came, the church, the first Sunday that we had services in what we call then the new building, not the laundromat. We decided not to place our membership that Sunday because people would think we were just doing it because of the new church. So we waited till the next Sunday, and then all the family went. But the funniest part was with Luke's and Bob and all the kids and Bob and Molly, they all placed their membership one Sunday. And Luke told them, "This is the only time, Dad, that you'll be able to say that over half of your congregation has membership." But anyway, like you all have said, the love was unbelievable. The support was unbelievable. When Bob retired, Tim said, "I want you in 10 words or less to say what Bob and Molly have meant to you." And I said, "Oh my, how do you say that in 10 words when you have spent a lifetime together and they've been there every time you ever needed them?" And this whole group has been there every time that we have had joy or that we have had sorrow or whatever. They are here. You can count on them. I can still count on every one of these people today, 40 years later.
Before I forget, I was baptized in this church. Yeah. And I was probably maybe the first person, the second, person that was baptized, and we had to go to
We had to go away.
we went to Morristown.
That's
Yes.
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
You're one of the early ones baptized.
Right,
Exactly
that
right.
was before,
You might have been the first.
I think I was the first.
Might have been
I'm
the
not
first
for sure on that, but
Yeah.
I think we were still in the laundromat even.
We
At that time.
were.
Yeah, at that time.
Yeah, we stayed at the laundromat.
I was still at the laundromat.
Is
That's
the
okay,
laundromat still there?
It
Yes,
worked
it
out
is.
Have any of y'all driven by to see the laundromat?
We moved there in '83 of July and left in September of '85, and we were there at that time.
Bob, I'm curious to ask you in terms of, when you came to help establish Jefferson City Christian Church.
Yes.
When did you, this is a strange question, I don't know if I'm asking it correctly, but when did you know that it was going to stick? Like, when did you know that Jefferson City Christian Church was taking on a life of its own in this community and wasn't going anywhere anytime soon?
I'll have to be very honest. When we first came, of course, as everyone has said, it was so small, and for the first year, we didn't have that many numbers. And so I would come home and we would be talking about it, and Molly said, "Well, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it?" And I said, "We've got to. We're going to make it. We're going to make it." And I would think somewhere between, you know, in that first year, 6 months to a year, there was just something that said, this church is going to be here. It's going to stay. I remember when we first moved here, we told the church that we were leaving. And I began to tell the people how many people we had as a core group, and I think we had about 6 or 7. And some of the elders looked at me and they just shook their head and said, why in the world are you going to a situation where you've only got a handful of people when you've got an established church here? And I said, well, I could be here the rest of my life at this church, and it would be fine. I could be comfortable. But I can't preach to you stepping out on faith and not challenging myself to step out on faith. And for some reason I said, I'm going to step out on faith, and we're going to plant a church in Jefferson City. And I well remember we started telling people about Jefferson City Christian Church, and they said, Jefferson City Christian Church?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. And I realized that where 2 or 3 people are meeting together in the name of the Lord, at least 2 of them will be Baptists. Not often all 3 of them. And so I realized we had some work to do. But
And Carson and
and Carson
Baptist
Newman.
College.
Yes, and Carson Newman.
Molly, I'd love to get your take on it.
But when did I think? I will have to say, when these people begin to leave the security and the comfortable place that they had at their churches, and they were willing to partner with us, I felt like God was sending us people to come alongside us and affirming the call that we felt like He had on our lives. So their presence, their willingness to step out on faith alongside us. I think that was it. I do remember in the new, what we call the new building.
Yes.
When we got up near 80, I thought, oh my goodness, this is wonderful. You know? So I think just you all coming, and just working with us.
As a new church, you don't have time to grow leaders. But what the amazing thing about it is, we had some people who were coming, Bruce Harrell, Joe Widener, and Jim, some of these people who were mature in the faith and could step in leadership roles when we desperately needed people for leadership roles. It was almost as if God was saying, this is a little small struggling church and they don't have time to grow up leaders, so I'm going to send them leaders who will be mentors for us younger men. And so God sent people like Bruce and others who came and were God sent. I'll tell you, I know one Sunday morning, Bruce came to church, pulled all the way across the parking lot, pulled to the end of the parking lot. And somebody asked him what he's doing. He said, well, as long as I'm here, I'm going to park all the way in because somebody might come visit and need a parking spot, and I can walk here. and so from that moment on.
From that day on, I cannot park close to the church. I
have to park
ruined it for everybody. I have to park as far as we can to leave room for the visitors.
But Bruce would come, our whole family would come. On Sunday morning, we were the first ones there with Bob, and we would set the chairs up. We had to set chairs up every Sunday
Which
morning.
was the weirdest thing, that they didn't have pews.
Yeah, we had chairs. And at
We got
first
to sit on
it
the
was
front row.
hard chairs. Didn't Mr. Nicholson buy us
Yep,
the patio
yep.
When we
chairs?
moved into the new building, Mr. Nicholson bought
Yes.
the first 100 chairs that we're still sitting on today.
And
I
we're
started
Still
saying
sitting
that's the same chairs.
It
I
is.
told somebody that.
But
that's
we
the
would
same.
go, we would be there first every Sunday, and the boys and Bob and Bruce would set up the chairs. And I usually would do communion, and all the other people had younger children. I'm the old one, and I had the teenagers, and they could help Bob and Bruce to get the chairs up. So we started out trying to alternate communion, but I said, I'm here every Sunday morning bright and early, so I'm going to do communion. So I wound up doing communion for 35 years. So, but it was nobody could explain what a wonderful church it was. It was just a loving church. I've never seen one.
One of the things about coming, when we left a stable church and we left a good church children's group. And we really were concerned about bringing our children to a new church where there was no children. And we were concerned about that. But when we came on Sunday morning, we just looked around and said, kids, Luke, John, help pick chairs. Grace Ann, She's little, but she's going to help in the nursery, or she's going to do that. So our children literally were raised. If you came to church, you had a job because there was something to do. And I wondered if maybe that was one of the things that helped our children to understand. And hopefully, as our children grew up and went to other churches, they just assumed that when you go to church somewhere, you find a place to serve.
And even today, I could see Mark and Greg. If somebody walks in and a chair's needed, they're up to get that chair. I mean, because you had to do that. There was nobody else to do it. So you did it. And so they're still used to that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Dean. So you've been listening to all the stories, and your family's been an integral part. So, what is your take on why Jefferson City Christian Church is a special place?
I'd say one thing is that Mr. Nicholson, I was talking about the first Sunday chair, I remember him dearly. He meant so much to me, he meant so much to the church, that he's the only man that's ever had a nameplate on the parking lot with his name on it right there in front. And also we had 103rd birthday party for him at the church, and it was packed in the old building, the fellowship hall. And I'd go by and see him all the time, and the Promise Keepers went over painting this house and all, but he's such an influence on everybody there. He's just a star without just outshine anybody, because he was such a lovely man, such a good man. He was so good that everybody, he had such a big heart. He made a big impression on me, because I was at the time going to the lake, working there, and I'd stop on the way back and forth all the time and visit with him. He amazed me how he just took his shower and listened to the ball game. He couldn't see, but he was just an amazing man, made such a big influence on me and a lot of people at the church. I think he touched a lot of people's life. And the other one that I think about is Bob and Bruce. When I had my stroke, Bob and Bruce took me back to church for the first time. The first Sunday I come back to church, he brought me back. And of course, when I had the stroke, Bob and a whole bunch of people, Joe, Sarah, there's a whole bunch of people was at the hospital before we got there. When I had it, that's such a fellowship and love and all. And of course with Bob and Bruce, when my brother died in Nashville, I'll bring this one up. And of course, it's not funny, it's a serious thing, it means a lot to me, is that I came back and talked to Bob and Bruce, and he had cancer and they didn't give me the chance. I talked to him about accepting the Lord. He'd never accepted the Lord, so I talked to him about it. Well, me being his brother, I knew I wanted to hear that, but I wanted Bob and Bruce to go down with me or meet me down there, come down. So they drive to Nashville, and of course Bruce and Bob goes in and talks to him, and he comes out and said they're convinced, yes, he accepted the Lord. So that meant a great deal to me, to Bruce Harrell and Bob, because of course Bob ended up preaching his funeral down there, of course, down at Nashville. So, but that in itself has meant so much, and besides our relationships with everybody, with the Smiths and with Ken, Judy, and all of them, it's just a good relationship I have with the family. And we love the people of the church, and they've been so good to us and been right there. As soon as when something happened, Bob would be right there at the house, and Bruce was just right on top of things too, on what he did. Bruce wasn't a hard man to love. I mean, he's somebody you really could care about, and Bob was the same way. He always reached out to us. He's been such a big support, and Molly, both of them have been so much for Lisa, and during the things that happen, tragedy, the different things happen. They've always been there through the good times and the bad times. All I can say is I love them dearly, and they've meant so much to me. I always have a place in my heart for them.
Connie, what about you? I'm curious about what Jefferson City, why is it special in your family's life?
It is my family.
It is.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as you all have,
Yeah.
let's
That's okay. No, I was just going to say, I'll add to what Dean said, is when Dean had the stroke, and what a comfort. And I agree with everything about the love in this group and everybody that has been right there for us. But when they took Dean to the emergency room, they kept him in front of the house and a little while, and by the time I got there and I walked in the emergency room, and here was all these our Christian, I don't know how many Christian friends that from church that were there when I got there waiting to pray and to comfort us and to be there with us. It was just an unreal feeling of love and support. But all of them have been a big support to us all of our 80-some years. And Bob and Molly have been there. Bob came to Harlan, preached my mother's funeral, and just any time we needed him and any of the other friends and all we needed, we knew that we had their support.
So, Bob,
This is, I have to say, when Dean was in the hospital, of course, when a person has a stroke and they can't take care of themselves, us guys in prayer group and promise keepers, we decided that each of us would choose a night and spend the night with Dean. And so
I never spent a night in the hospital by myself.
Never spent a night in the hospital by himself. So it just so happened that that he and I happened to be at church at the hospital together. And I'll have to illustrate what happened. We were getting Dean up off of the chair, and we're going to stand him up. And he had a pair of jogging pants, and he's standing there, and he was almost immobile. And so we stood him up, and Tom took the pants and pulled him way up like this. He stood there. He did a wedgie right there. You remember that thing? A little bit of fun.
well, it seems like we got a theme. We got pants coming off the gym. We got wedgies going on.
On the phone, you were talking about how close we were and everything. I do remember this, but when we did, after we got in the building and all, and we had started having a lot more new people, I remember that a lot of them would say, "Now, whose wife are you?" Or whose, and they could not figure out who belonged to who. Because we were all close and talking always with somebody, you know. I'd be talking Bruce, and all different ones, so they didn't know, they couldn't figure out which husband and wife belonged together.
I just wanted to say that Molly has been our fearless leader from day one. We depended on her to lead us. Now, we were not really good followers, but she did continue to lead us. And we tried. We were trying to be good followers. But she was our leader, and we loved her to the bottom of our hearts.
Yes.
So I'm hearing all these stories about relationships and love. So as you all being some of the early families, what advice would you give to us as contemporaries or to some of the younger folks that are joining the church now? What advice would you give them to help not only them in their lives, but also continue to grow the church family? If you were to give somebody advice right now, what would you give them?
I'll say that I think that the common thread I hear is fellowship, is getting to know, is not passing someone in the hall on Sunday morning and, or maybe at a group on, during the week or something that you have, but actually getting to know. We knew one another. We knew our children. I knew Judy's children. I knew Judy's children. I knew Molly. We knew each other intimately, and I think that's what, like how they, we actually did like if somebody needed a loaf of bread, we took it. I'm not saying that literal, but I'm saying we did share among ourselves because none of us did have a whole lot of money in that very first core group, and I just think we shared with each other. We shared leftovers and just anything like that, but we knew one another intimately.
Who else?
That kind of goes into what, the younger generation all wants to get. I think of John. I'll never forget when John first started preaching, talking about the circles, and I thought, what in the world is he talking about? But he's talking about small groups. But if you think about it, we all kind of started out in a small group because we all kind of, I can remember being at Greg and Phyllis's. I can remember, what was it called at Christmas when we went to each other's
Dinner.
progressive dinners. Oh, we had so much fun doing those, where you would have an appetizer, let's say at Molly's house, and then everybody would load up and we would go, let's say, to Connie's house for the entree. I mean, we would go 6, 7, 8 stops, and it was so much fun. Of course, we can't do that now, but I just think, you know, that's how that started. So that's how you remain or you keep that intimacy. Because I'll be honest with you, in church this morning, I looked around, and yes, we go to different services, but we have a lot of new people that I have no idea who they are, or if it was their first Sunday, or if it was their 10th Sunday. But I mean, if we don't stay in those, you know, get in those small groups, I think that we won't be as successful, I guess, as we have been in the past. You know, our Wednesday night women's group, I'm telling you, that group right there just shows how many people have moved in from different parts of the country. I mean, I think last year there was 5 people that were from Jefferson, or what were from the church originally, not originally, but you know, the early church, and there was like 20 women in there that were new. And so that says a whole lot that people are coming to our church. But I think if you don't maintain a little bit of that intimacy, getting to know people, like Lisa said, I think, you know, that sure is a real common, a real good thing that we need to keep, try to strive for.
Anybody else? Advice?
I was just gonna say, show up for each other, spend time together.
Yes. Raise your kids together.
And don't think we
Experience,
wouldn't
right.
clear those chairs out in the old sanctuary and have a hoedown or a dance or a line dance. We teach country line dance. Luke, he'd throw on his cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and we'd just have us a big time fellowship.
I use my name too, but.
You mean Pastor Luke? Is that what
I
you're
mean, Pastor Luke,
Yeah.
he could do a mean boot scoop.
Bob, what advice would you give, Bob?
Oh, I agree. I sort of can't help but reiterate what Luke said. You know, studying the Bible is absolutely essential for growth, but the connection that you have with one another, the fellowship that you have, and the building of relationships, there is no substitute for that. Study after study after study has demonstrated that people who come to your church, unless they get involved in other people's lives, they're not near as apt to stay at your church. The one common bond that keeps people coming is the relationships that they form with other people.
I think this is Roma's obvious. This is the example of that.
Exactly.
Molly?
I think serving together, because you talk about the women's ministry. I didn't have a clue how to lead a women's ministry.
Well, you did a good
But,
job.
but we had an idea, everyone, I can remember calling Sue for a women's retreat, trying to work out which rooms we were putting people in, and she said, just tell me what I need to do. and I think that's a good example of just this group. I mean, just whatever needed to be done. So we served together. I think that was key, because we had a purpose and a goal in mind. It wasn't just to be together for fellowship. We were accomplishing a purpose, and again, you all coming alongside us was that you had the faith and you were willing to risk it and encourage us. Same way, you know, I think that be willing to, and that's what I would say to the younger generation. Don't underestimate the value of investing in people.
Don't be selfish.
I don't know if we remember that or not. When we talked about the first building, we couldn't afford a turnkey job. And so we decided that we would hire a contractor to do some of the work, but we would have volunteer days when we would come to the church and we would stack block and we would clean block and we would do whatever we could, because we knew we couldn't afford to pay someone to come in and do the job. And I can't help but share one little funny story.
Wait just a minute.
Oh, no.
I'll tell it myself. Okay.
Are y'all telling the same?
Well,
I think I know
yes,
what
we
you're
are.
telling. I
We
think
are.
I
We're
know the
telling the
story.
same one.
Just a second.
This is, it wasn't my best day. That's all I can say. I mean, we had probably been working, I don't know. Well, the walls
All
were up.
day.
Walls were up all day.
But we had been, I mean, we would work every Saturday.
Yes, we did.
Every Saturday, we pretty
Come to
much
church.
worked at the church. And that was just the way the week went. And sometimes in the evenings too,
Yes,
didn't we?
you'd get off from work, we had something to do.
Yeah. And it was this hot Saturday, and we were laying blocks, and Yule and I were pretty much the grunts for the we mixed the mortar,
With
we
block
hauled everything,
Yeah.
and Bob and Ken and who else would get up
On the scaffolding.
on the scaffolding and lay the blocks. They had the skill. We were just grunts. And I don't know, Ken was running his mouth or something up there.
And he's hanging on the scaffolding.
He's hanging up the scaffolding, running his mouth. And it wasn't my best day. I just got to be honest with you. But he said
Was
something.
all tired.
We was all tired. We was all tired. And he said something to me about blah, 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 blah. And I just took the hose and just turned it on him. Him 18 feet up. There was nothing he could do except take it. And I gave it to him. I went the boy down. I mean, his pants were dripping. But he had no shorts on.
That's probably short.
Whatever was there was dripping. It wasn't my best day. And wait. Ken, I'm sorry. I'm serious. I wish I hadn't done it.
Go ahead and
I
say,
thought about
"Y'all
that.
shouldn't hold like that."
Yes, you do a little feel free. You get down. But I do apologize.
When Joe and I had that, when we lost our baby, I don't know what I would have done without this group. But I ended up doing a support group to help other women go through that. And there's so many women that went through that did not have, a Christian family. They did not know God. How do you go through life without hope and people that surround you with love and the love of God? I don't know how anyone could go through life without that. And that's what this group has done for us. I mean, Joe and I both have, we're just so thankful that Molly and Lisa came and got us here.
Anybody else?
I'll have to say that this group, they're the reason that my children didn't resent being the preacher's kids, but they always thought it was a privilege to be the preacher's kids because they were so loved by this group of people.
All of us older people were sitting around, we were, of course I wasn't that old then, 40 years younger, but still, young people would come and just sit with you.
See, soon I'm still sitting.
You're still sitting there. The kids would all come. Grace Ann might sit by me one Sunday, or Luke might sit down by me. They didn't go back to their group and just sit. They were all involved with the older people, and we learned to love them too, even if we wanted to clip their heads off occasionally.
A few times.
Well, I think that this has been a fabulous look at Jefferson City Christian Church from the beginning, and I want to tell you personally, thank you for the lives that you have led and influenced my family, but also for the families that you've influenced, even the ones that you don't know you have. There have been many, and the jokes and the fun and the tragedy. So I'm thankful, and I think that this has been a really good opportunity for us to reminisce. 40th anniversary or not, this might need to be something that we do every 5 years just to catch up and see. But Bob, I think it's probably appropriate to give you the opportunity to close us off tonight. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Wrap us up. How do we wrap this up?
I know we keep saying the same thing, but churches tend to give more credit to preachers when things go good, and they also tend to blame preachers more when things go bad, because ultimately the one at the top gets shot at, and the one that takes the blessings and the curses. But I will say freely, if it hadn't been for these people who gathered here, we would not have made it. We're we're the beneficiaries of those people who, for whatever reason, believed in us and supported us. Bruce called me one day. He said, "Let's have lunch together." I didn't know Bruce that well. And I said, what does Bruce want to talk about? What you got to say? Well, we had lunch and we didn't even talk about church. Next Wednesday, he said, "Bob, let's have lunch." I said, "This is funny. He's calling me to have lunch." And so for months and months and months, every Wednesday was lunch day with Bruce Harrell. And we didn't talk about church necessarily. We didn't talk about anything. We just had lunch as friends. But that's what this church is the fact that I'm the beneficiary of people who believed enough to give up the security of a church, raising children, coming from a new community, and there were other churches around that they could have gone to, strong churches, big churches, or bigger than ours, coming into a church of 15, 20, 30, 40 people. But for whatever reason, those people believed in what we were doing and stayed. And the church today is what it is because of these people. And I am eternally and will always be eternally grateful for what they did to assure that we could stay, because when we'd go through a tough time, I would come through the door and Mom would say, "Well, we're going to make it." And we made it another week, we made it another year, and now 40 years.
I know he's supposed to close, but.
I think it's actually more appropriate that you close when you think
Thanks.
about it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just, the people that have come later on in years, they will never experience what we have experienced together. But I still believe that Jefferson City Christian Church is a welcoming church. I still believe that we include and we welcome people into our fellowship. And I don't think that has changed.